I don't know how she does that. My hand's killing me. Okay, it's been a long time since the last time she was gone. You know, sometimes being out of the synagogue for, I've been gone for a few weeks. I took a week of vacation. I went to Osrui. Some of our students who have been campers there are back even, so this is going to be a little familiar. And you miss reality when you're not in your day-to-day so often. And so this is my first week back, and I'm kind of in rabbi tax season. This is when we think about high holy days, and Alan, our executive director, the other day said, so, Fred, what are you going to be talking about for the high holidays? I almost wanted to move town. I wanted, how do you find messages that can try and be inclusive and try and share something where we can think about a greater good? And then I come back, this is my first week, it's not even a full week. I've only been in the office since Wednesday. And I'm exhausted, by the way. And this weekend begins Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, marks the destruction of the holy temples. And we see all of these sources in Jewish tradition that say that the temples were destroyed because of this hatred and infighting and bloodshed and hurting and acts of idolatry, all of these things where people forget about God, and the temples were destroyed. And it's not just that temples were destroyed, but then there was this exile. And when you're in exile, it doesn't have to only be physical. When we think about Tisha B'Av, we think about the physical. We think about how the people living in the land of Israel were sent out and they were kicked out to Babylonia. Some stayed, but many were gone. And at some point they were allowed back. The Babylonians lost their empire. The Persians won. And then at some point, Cyrus permitted all of these ancient Jews, the Israelites still, to come back. But even still, you can be in exile without being exiled from land. You can still find exile from God. You can still find a way to be in exile from our own true selves. We've given that sermon here a bunch of times. But at camp, we had a guest. His name is Rick Jacobs, and he's the head of the Reform movement, the president of the Union for Reform Judaism. And there was this news article that he shared as a story for Shabbat that I've been thinking about it ever since, because we see an antidote in this message, because we learn that one of the reasons that those temples were destroyed was out of sinat chinam. Sinah is the word for the hatred. Chinam is kind of hard to translate, and most people call this term as a baseless hatred, a senseless hatred. It's not rooted in anything. So there was a news story some years ago about an Israeli. His name is Nadav ben Yehuda, and Nadav ben Yehuda, this is a true story. One of my true stories is actually true. He had an inclination. He's done with the army. He served as a commander, and he won some contest of, climbing up the highest tower in Tel Aviv by steps and doing it a few times. So he climbed like 20,000 steps. I don't know, it's Meshuggah, something like this. And he was like, okay, what should I do next? And so he starts training to climb Mount Everest. And so he does for a couple of years. And he's raising thousands of dollars in order for the equipment and the training and to try and figure out how you're going to do this. He's never done anything like this before. And there is an Israeli before him that has climbed, but he would be the youngest Israeli. And this was like super exciting for him. So he worked really hard in order to get there. So he gets to Nepal, and he's about to climb more than 29,000 feet high. And at a certain point, what I've learned since, at a certain point, there isn't any more oxygen, and there's something that people there who think about these things, they call a dead zone, because so many people die. In fact, on his way up, he passed other people along the way, up on this climb, that died, trying to go up to this mountaintop. Now, that's a hard thing for me to understand, but there are so many people that are pursuing this, and he's all eager to reach this summit, so he goes higher and higher and higher, and At a certain point, there's a base camp along the way at different stations, perhaps. And he reaches one of these base camps, and he meets this man named Aden Irmak. He's from Turkey, and he's been living in New York. And Aden Irmak and Nadav ben Yehuda start a conversation at this base camp, already high up on the mountain, but they're relaxing and they're kind of gearing up for the next part of the journey, trying to reach the summit to find that inspiration and a sense of achievement. And they talk and they debate, and he says at the time, Turkey and Israel didn't have a great relationship. It's not much different today. It's still a very challenging relationship. So they're talking and they're arguing and they're trying to understand each other, and they're also just kind of making their own country's pronouncements, and it's all fine. They have this kinship. But Aden Irmak, goes up the mountain before Nadav. Nadav doesn't want to get stuck with all of these other people going up there because there's a logjam, and that's dangerous. You have to keep going. It's hard to stop and wait when it's so cold, 70 degrees below zero. And they're going up to the summit. And at a certain point, he says he's about 300 meters away, and I think that's about 900 feet. Don't quote me. And about 300 meters away from the summit, and he's ready to reach this goal of his, something he's been really working toward, and he sees something in kind of like in a crack in the ice. And he's already passed along people that have died. 4 other people that day died on this hike. 300 meters away, 900 feet. He can see the summit. There's no more air. He's not just bundled up. He has layers upon layers of special kinds of layers that I can't explain to you. He has an oxygen tank and an oxygen mask. And he has gloves that are like these mittens to keep his hands together, and they can't come out. And they're heating his hands. And in this crack in the ice, he sees something, sees someone, and he kind of touches it, and he recognizes that this person is alive and moves this person who has no gloves and who has no oxygen tank anymore and no mask and who's barely breathing and who's unresponsive, and it is Aden Irmak, the man that he was discussing and arguing and debating with down at the base camp. So now Nadav has a choice. He's been working so hard, other people couldn't make it. He can go up to the summit and make his way there and have that achievement. And for the little bit he could think, because there's no air, so you don't really have cognition there, he does recognize it will probably be safer if he just goes to the summit. He should just go. But then he has something else that's in him, whether it's a spark or his army training that says we don't leave anybody behind. He was a commander in the Israel Defense Forces. Something said, well, maybe I should take him back. He's 300 meters away. He can see the summit. He's been doing this for 2 months, climbing this Fakakta mountain. He had a chance to achieve his goal or to turn back and try and carry him. And if he carries this man down, it's likely that both of them are not going to make it. And if he passes him by and goes to the summit, it's likely to be a safer decision for him. So he takes his friend, really the man that he just met for a day or two, and he connects him to his harness, and he goes down 900 feet away, and he never gets to the summit. So he goes down. It took him 8 hours. And along the way down, 8 hours carrying this other man, he had to address the harness, so he had to take off one of those gloves. After an hour, his hand froze. He couldn't feel it. It was paralyzed because of the cold. His oxygen mask broke, so he could barely breathe. And he's carrying this man down to the base camp. 8 hours. And they make it. They make it. Aden Irmak talks about how he spoke to Nadav's family in Israel and says, I want you to know you now have family both in America and in Turkey. I am here because of Nadav ben Yehuda from Israel, where we don't really share the same language, don't necessarily share the same beliefs, don't necessarily share the same worldview, but Nadav is going to save this man's life and putting himself at risk. Sometimes when we talk about love, we think about our loving relationships. I don't know if the Torah is really thinking about the emotional love. I think when it talks about love your neighbor, love the stranger, it says we should treat them as if they're created in God's image with a little bit of love. So maybe the response on Tisha B'Av isn't just about the mourning and remembering. The 9th day of Av, when we think about exile and harshness and people out to get the Jews, there's another piece that we can think about. It's not just sinat chinam, it's ahavat chinam. It's baseless love. Can we love more? I don't mean like we all have to start holding hands and skipping. That's not really for me. I would have gone to California if I wanted to hug everybody. But can we treat people with God's love that goes through us and take care of each other, even sometimes when it's inconvenient, like on Mount Everest? Can we figure out how to respond to harshness and hardship? Can we figure out why the temple was destroyed? The Gemara says the first temple was destroyed because of idolatry and sexual immorality and bloodshed. The second temple, when people were still studying Torah and doing mitzvot, it was destroyed because of senseless, baseless hatred. That's why the temple was destroyed. And Rav Kook, almost 2,000 years later, an Orthodox, one would say an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, the first chief rabbi in then pre-state Israel and Palestine, Rav Kook teaches that the antidote for that baseless hatred is baseless, a senseless love, a love that makes no sense, but we're going to take care of each other. Friends, we have some work to do. And it's not just in our country, it's right here in our own synagogue. It's for the people that are new here or sitting by themselves, or when somebody isn't so sure what's going on with them, for us to check in and ask. That's baseless love. That's when we try and go out of our way as best as we can. We can't just leave it up to, the clergy to make the visit. I got to tell you, I'm outnumbered. We need to take care of each other somehow. And if we can do that a little bit better in here, I'm sure we can do it a lot better out there. So the ending of the story is, I think we can see love in other people. I think we can figure out how to express that. The craziest thing is this guy went up on another mountain, Nadav, the Israeli. Last May, he fell and was stuck in the snow on the third highest mountain of the world. I can't pronounce it. It starts with a K. And somebody saved his life. You can think about what that might mean. There's something there. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something there, folks. So let's bring that into our lives, our actions, our community, our country, and our world. Back to the Siddur. Let's move to conclude 586.